Mike, you're with NTM Advisory. NTM stands for
Navigate the maze.
Navigate the Maze. Why did you select that as the name of your brand?
Yeah, great question. So I've been in IT and information security for a little over 15 years. And one thing that I have seen at a lot of my clients and in a lot of my peers and stakeholders outside of IT and security is that security and especially compliance sometimes feels like a maze. You don't know, do you turn left, do you turn right? So for me, I want to help my clients navigate that maze of cyber risk and, figure out what does the maze look like, help them or even walk with them through that maze and help them get to the destination that they want to get to.
So when you are starting with a new client, what are the first steps you take to navigate that maze?
Understanding business context is so incredibly important. What industry are they in? What's the size of their organization? Where do they want to be on a maturity curve? Do they have in-house expertise or skill sets, or are they going to rely on external third parties, managed service providers? Really understanding the lay of the land. I don't come in with a canned solution. I don't come in with, this is the report that you're going to get, like it or don't like it. We meet our clients where they are and we develop solutions, partnering with them that are going to sustain long after NTM is done with our work.
What does a client that's calling you up and hiring you to advise them, what do they typically look like before you?
My target client base are small and medium-sized businesses and typically in more highly regulated industries. They're an organization that has multiple departments. They are big enough that they have defined functions, but most of their investment or their time has been on the product or the service that they are offering to their customers. For me, my goal is not to operate necessarily long-term with an organization, but to design a security program. Where are they today? Where do they want to be? And what's the right operating model? And what's the right team, including what's the right leadership for those goals?
So an idea that you've brought up is what you would call the pragmatic CISO. Can you tell me a little bit about how you've come up with that idea and what that means to you?
Pragmatism, I think, is something that's not as prevalent as it should be in information security professionals. We live and breathe the threat landscape, the technologies that are in there. And the reality is most business stakeholders don't understand, the same space that we're in. Successful CISOs, they engage with their business stakeholders. They understand and bring the business context. They also realize it's not just them. They have to establish partnerships both within the organization and outside of the organization. And lastly, they understand the business is there to make money and security is one component of it. So the right answer for an organization may be different than the industry standard organization, right? The answer for a financial services organization is going to be different than a retail organization. And a pragmatic CISO recognizes that and tailors and operates within the context of the business that they are part of.
An idea that I've been hearing a lot is this idea that one of the things that information security people are struggling with is how to tie it to business objective. That's something I think you've come across, and I think that's showing through the pragmatic CISO. So question I have for you is, how have you been able to apply that? How have you become a strategic advantage for your clients as opposed to just a cost?
Yeah. So one of the things in my career is I went back and got an MBA to build on top of my technical background because I wanted to understand and be able to speak the language of business. It's a different language than is in IT and security. And what I've found most has made me most successful is anchoring on the language of risk, because risk is understood by executives, whether it's financial risk, a CFO, do we invest here? Do we invest here? From an operations perspective, there's risk associated with the manufacturing line. There's risk of suppliers, right? And so anchoring back to risk and what is the business outcome that we want to achieve or we want to avoid is a really strong tool in my experience to engage outside of security leadership.
How do you apply pragmatism to that language around risk?
A very important thing is setting aside your own definition of what the risk threshold should be and collaborating with the rest of the executive team or with the appropriate stakeholders, may include the board of directors, to define and agree to what the acceptable threshold and risk level is for that organization. Oftentimes, in my experience and my observation, CISOs will say, it is not acceptable for us to lose any data in our organization. On the flip side, a general counsel or a CFO or a CEO may say, it's going to take us, picking some numbers, it's going to take us $10 million to completely re-architect our application and move our data into some location. It's going to take us 4 years to do that. Or if we lose certain data and we are subject to a $10,000 fine in this state and a $30,000 fine in this state, I'm willing to accept that risk because the cost and the resource allocation doesn't make sense from a business objective. And so, understanding what is keeping the CEO up at night, if data was lost, if a system was down for an amount of time, if they had to call their customers and explain to them something occurred, what are they comfortable with? One of the tools that I found to be really effective with this is doing tabletop exercises where you come up with a scenario. It's important to define a scenario that's tailored to the business. If you're coming to them with a scenario that is truly academic and they can see that, they're not going to engage, right? So it's important in order for them to actually get into it, get into the model and viscerally feel, what am I doing if the FBI calls me when I'm on the phone with my external counsel and I'm deciding, do I issue a press release now or do we do it in 8 hours? That is incredibly important. And once you go through that experience as an executive outside of the security team, you can start making some more of those decisions. And as an advisor, observing those dynamics and how some of those decisions are made and the discussion around those decisions allows me or enables me to be way more pragmatic in building the program, operating the program to meet their business need.
So what are some additional strategies that CISOs or information security professionals can use to build buy-in at the executive level?
I'm a huge proponent of using analogies and thinking about ways to allow other executives and other stakeholders to connect. When I'm talking with small businesses and even some larger businesses, the analogy of securing your house and talking about multiple entry points. There are doors, there are windows. There's a possibility that somebody could, drive a car through a wall. Like, what are different scenarios that outsiders could get into your house? You can put a whole bunch of deadbolts on your front door, but if you leave your back door unlocked, you're not balanced on a risk perspective. Do you put alarm sensors on every single window or just the windows on the first floor? I think that the example or the analogy to a home, securing a home, resonates with people across all different industries.
So what fundamental business challenges are faced by information security professionals? And what have you done in the past to overcome them?
I think the biggest business challenges to information security professionals are the same to leaders in other departments. It's resourcing, it's prioritization, and it's funding. I guess I would say one thing that is a bit different in information security is the rate of change to the threat landscape. Environmental threats are changing, but not at the same rate that hackers are leveraging new technologies. You think about the advancement of AI and the incorporation of the generative AI tools and techniques in improving attack mechanisms. that is one of the things that is different and is a huge challenge for security leaders. Understanding the threat landscape in the context of your business, there are always going to be exposure points. There's always going to be vulnerabilities, right? It's just a matter of time and resources and effort. Most of my clients, small and medium-sized businesses, they are not designing for nation state threat actors. If a nation state threat actor came after their organization, they're going to get compromised. What they're defending for and they're designing their program for is more of that opportunistic attacker, the one that's going to spray, passwords or search for a vulnerability across a whole range of IP addresses and only go after the ones that pop up as showing vulnerable. They want to stay off of that, that easy list, if you will.
So if you're on an elevator with a CISO or a CTO and they're taking on the SOC 2 audit for the first time, so you have 30 seconds to give them some advice and they're asking for it. What advice are you give it in 30 seconds?
To me, the most important thing in any audit is defensibility. So focus on applying a consistent approach to your documentation, to your control implementation, to your evidence capture. When you are engaging with external auditors, being able to tell a story that reflects the reality of your organization is the most important thing to achieve the outcome that you're hoping for and in the most efficient manner.
Why is that the case? What have you seen in the past that says this is really important?
So what I've seen, and I've been on the receiving end of this a few times, is you focus on one area that as a business you've been working on. You've really been improving your patch and vulnerability management program over the last 6 months, and you put together awesome evidence there. You get into the audit, and the auditor asks one question about it, and they move on, and they catch on one thing that you say in a different area, your physical security controls, and they drill down and ask more detailed questions there. And you're like, well, we thought we were good because we have locks on the doors or whatever the answer is. So being able to take that step back and viewing your controls and viewing your documentation and looking at, do we have a consistent narrative? And that consistent narrative also includes an acknowledgement of where you may have weaker controls and you have compensating controls in place, right? If you don't take that step back and say, what is our narrative? What is our depth across our different controls? Then you get caught in a position where you don't have an answer. And when auditors hear you don't have an answer, they start digging deeper and they start asking more questions. I think building a rapport with your auditor, understanding where they're coming from and why they're asking in the way that they're asking. I always advise, and I always spend time up front before we get into the audit, talking about the business, talking about their experience and their background, sharing my background and my experience. So we have a little bit better understanding of where we're coming at. And that'll allow us to navigate and work through those conversations better throughout the audit.
Last point, as a follow-up to what you said earlier about the landscape pretty consistently changing while you're in this space, right? You got to stay on top of what are the new threats, et cetera. How do you stay on top of that? How do you find information about what's coming in the future as far as threats that you're aware of?
To me, my biggest asset is my network. I subscribe to a number of RSS feeds. I read the news. I have alerts for specific clients that I'm supporting or certain technologies that I know that are used prevalently in my client base. To me, I'm never going to be able to be focused on every single dimension of the security landscape. Having friends, having peers, having, people in my network that can share what they're working on, what their organization is faced with, that helps me understand and stay up to date with what are other people worried about, what is being challenged out there.
This is awesome. I appreciate it. Really appreciate your time. Hopefully we'll do it again in the future.
My pleasure, Michael. Thanks for making the time.